Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Francesco, and with our get together today, we're going to do topic 6, which is going to be about a bit more details about those 5 ingredients we covered in topic 5. So if you're not sure what I'm talking about, make sure you go and review topic 5 because that will give you a bit more context for what we're doing right now. Maybe I'll help you a little bit with a little bit of review for our part, okay? The 5 ingredients we're looking at that we covered in topic 5 are the following: major occupancy, building area, building height, streets or number of streets, and whether or not a building is sprinklered or not sprinklered. And what we found when we looked at topic 5 was that we required to review the contents of these 73 articles in Division B, starting with Article 3.2.2.20 all the way to Article 3.2.2.92, and that these articles contain the requirements to figure out what the construction requirements would have to be for a building and what the fire ratings and resistance would have to be of a building to ensure that the fire would not spread out of that building and that it would not cause collapse of that building. Okay? The way that these articles were set up, if you remember topic 5, is they went from most restrictive to least restrictive. So the higher the article number, the less restrictive were the requirements in that article for construction purposes. Okay? Also, topic 5 allowed you to do question 1 in homework 2. Now for topic 6, what we're going to do is we're going to go in a bit more detail of each of these ingredients, and that will help you with question 2 in homework 2, which I hope is helpful. Let's start with the first one, major occupancy. We talked a fair bit about major occupancy previously, okay? Was that maybe topic 2? Topic 3 maybe? Go find out. But the critical thing that I want to cover specifically now, in addition to what we covered previously, is this. What happens for the purposes of construction requirements according to the contents of subsection 3.2.2 if each building we're analyzing has more than one major occupancy? You see, these articles we looked at here, these 73 articles we looked at, if you notice from topic 5, each of those articles is for one major occupancy in that building. But I mean, it's possible that you go inside a building and there is more than one major occupancy in that building. Let's say what's starting to happen now with a lot of redevelopment, say in Ottawa, where the bottom story of a high-rise building ends up being like commercial, like a mall or something like that, or mercantile, and the rest are residential, okay, for the purposes of intensification. Well, that's what we're going to be doing right now, and we're going to be doing it by me showing you what's going to happen. This example is in your course notes as well, so you can follow along in your course notes too. But let's look at the case of this 3-story building. Let's assume this 3-story building that I'm showing you has an area of 2,000 square meters. It's facing 3 streets, and the building itself is unsprinklered. And as it's shown here, part of the building is C major occupancy, and part of the building is D major occupancy. So using these articles here that we saw in topic 5, in those 73 articles, we saw that each of these articles only has one major occupancy at the time in it. How do we deal with a building that has 2 in it, or 3, or 4, or more? Well, we're going to use these articles, but we're going to pretend that this building is each of the major occupancies one at a time. So for example, we're going to start off by assuming that all major occupancies in that building are C, and see what we get as a result from that. If we apply what we learned in topic 5 and we go through that process, we see that the governing article is 3.2.250, given these conditions here, okay? And in that article, it says that the construction requirements for this building must be non-combustible construction. And we'll learn more about what that means in topic 7. Also, that the fire resistance rating of that construction must be 1 hour for floors, roofs, and I think load-bearing walls too. We'll learn more about that in topic 7, what that means. Okay? But this is what we learned in topic 5. Let's assume everything was a C major occupancy. These are the results we get. So I'm going to put that result right up here. And then I'm going to repeat the work for this building, assuming that everything in it is a D major occupancy, because we know how to do that from topic 5. So if we go through that work from topic 5, we find that the governing article for this building, assuming that it's a D major occupancy, is Article 3.2.2.62 in Division B of the Ontario Building Code. And what does that give us in terms of a result? It says that the construction of the material used here must be combustible, or can be combustible or non-combustible, and that the fire resistance rating must be 45 minutes. Okay, I'm going to add that up here so we can compare those two results. See which one is higher. So that means that we have to use the requirements where we got the higher result from, which is the contents of Article 3.2.2.50. So we use the most conservative of those results when it comes to the combustibility of material and the fire resistance rating. So if you have more than 2 major occupancies, you're going to repeat this process for each of those major occupancies to see how they affect the whole building. Okay? That's how it's done for the purposes of major occupancy. Now, I've outlined this work in the course notes as well. Your course notes might look the same as this or maybe slightly different, okay? But it's in there too, so make sure that you review the course notes for this course if you're a registered student. If you're not a registered student and you're catching this on YouTube, you don't have access to the course notes as I've previously explained. Ingredient number 2 that we covered in topic 5 was building area. Remember, we also covered it in topic 3. Well, when it comes to building area, the whole point of it is that we want to be able to remember that buildings can just be big cookie cutters. Okay, so that the building area of that building is what you get if you press the building down into the ground and whatever shape then it leaves out of that. Ingredient number 3, nothing more about ingredient number 2. Ingredient number 3, building height. If you remember, we covered that in topic 3 as well. And this too is a definition in the Ontario Building Code. So that means that the Building Code specifically defines what this means. And according to the Ontario Building Code, building height is the number of stories. It's not the vertical measurement of the building under consideration. So that's why, according to the Ontario Building Code, the Leaning Tower of Pisa is 4 times taller than the Pyramid of Giza. That's because it has 4 times more stories in it. Okay? So make sure you're aware of this. That's what the building height is. The critical thing, though, when it comes to figuring out the number of stories, is being able to identify the first story. If you can identify the first story, then it's easy to count all the other ones. But you'd be surprised, this actually can be a bit difficult. Fortunately for us, see what happened to the words first story? If you look for this in the Ontario Building Code, it's actually written in an italicized font. That means there's a specific definition for first story in the Ontario Building Code. More about definitions under topic 1, so go check that out. But I'm going to tell you how to figure out a first story, okay? In general terms, though, I want to show you why this is important, okay? Because figuring out how to identify a first story is critical. So let me show you an example. I'm going to show you, when I was walking around, I found this example of a building, okay? And I'm just going to zoom into it. Okay, you see this building right here? Whoops, but doesn't matter, okay? It's this building right here. Do you see, here, I'm going to move from a different point of view. Do you see how this window here, okay, right here. So you have to walk up many, many steps to enter the building, right? Can you see it up there? You have to walk up many, many steps. And then, so you might think that this is a basement here, these windows that I'm pointing to right here, and that this would be the first story. But you actually may be wrong, because there is an actual definition for first story, which might make those over there. So this, see this window right up here? That might be the first story, depending on the definition that the building code gives the first story. But the reason this is important is because this building right here, it's a residential occupancy right here. So you can see that having that basement, if it is a basement as a first story, changes this building from a 3-story to a 4-story. And that's important because it changes this residential building from a Part 9 to a Part 3 building, which makes it a lot more expensive and a lot more requirements that must be inputted for safety and security purposes. So knowing where the first story is can be very important. So let's find out then, in fact, what a first story is. The definition in the Ontario Building Code for a first story is this. It is that story where the floor of that story is the closest one to grade, and grade means the ground level outside, okay? And the ceiling of that story must be more than 1.8 meters above grade, okay? So again, the two ingredients for a first story are the floor of that story must be the closest one to grade, whether above or below it, and the ceiling of that potential first story must be more than 1.8 meters or 1,800 millimeters above grade, where grade is the ground level outside. Okay, so I put this in your course notes. For example, this, I'm calling this first story question mark. Is that a first story? Not sure, right? So does it meet the requirements of a first story? Well, that potential first floor or first story, well, the floor of that first story out of all the other stories is the closest one to grade, right? You can see the grade on the other side, on the far side. I'm showing it as that dark straight line outside. Also, grade is at 1,850 millimeters from the ceiling of that potential first story. So it looks like it is meeting the requirement of a first story. So yes, it is a first story because it meets those two requirements. That story, its floor is the closest one to grade outside, and its ceiling is at least 1.8 meters or 1,800 millimeters above the grade level outside. Okay, so that's what helps us figure out whether or not a building has like the first floor or the first story of that building. Now, I want to discuss mezzanines, but if I could, maybe I want to go back a second to first story right here, okay? Here's why. In North America, the way that the first story is identified can be different from other parts in the world, okay? In other parts of the world, like for example, Europe, and I believe some parts of Western Asia, maybe Africa, I'm not 100% sure, but maybe you can let me know in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube. I know for sure in many parts of Europe, what we call in North America the first floor or the first story, in Europe, it's called the ground floor. And the first story is actually the floor above it, okay? Whereas in Canada, where I am right now, or in North America, the first floor, the ground floor in Europe is called the first floor, and the floor above it is called the second floor. So be aware of this. Here, according to the Ontario Building Code, there is no ground floor for the purposes of number of stories. It's all first floor or first story, second story, third story, and fourth story. So I wanted to make sure that you're aware of this, okay? Because that's how it's done here in North America. Okay, the other thing that I want to discuss is mezzanines. Mezzanines, you see how they're written in italicized font? That means there is a definition for this in the Ontario Building Code. But what it comes down to is this. A mezzanine is a partial floor or a balcony that you find inside a building. Okay, so I'm showing you here a photo that I've taken about a specific building at Algonquin College. If you're one of my students, see if you can figure out where I've taken this photo. Okay, according to the Ontario Building Code, sometimes mezzanines can be considered as a story inside a building, and sometimes they're not. Okay, so what I want to help you with this video is how to figure that out. The requirements under Part 3 of Division B of the Ontario Building Code related to mezzanines are covered in these 6 sentences. So from sentence 3.2.1.1.3 all the way to sentence 8. I've put in information about mezzanines in your course notes. Now, your course notes may look like this or a little slightly different, so make sure you read them because they're in your course notes if you're a registered student in this course. The ones specifically, the sentences specifically that we're going to be using in this course and for the purposes of our topics are these 2 sentences. So sentence 3.2.1.13 and 4 under Division B of the Ontario Building Code. And to figure out whether or not a mezzanine is a story or not, according to these 2 sentences, is a 3-step process. Step number 1. Does the mezzanine under consideration have partitions or walls that are no more, so less than or equal to 1,070 millimeters in height? That's the question. If the answer is yes, and that mezzanine has an area that's more than 40% of the floor below, yes, that mezzanine is considered a story according to sentence 3.2.1.13. If the answer is no, and the mezzanine has an area that's more than 10% of the floor below, yes, it's considered a story according to sentence 3.2.1.14. In all other cases, it's not considered a story. And luckily for you, there's going to be some homework questions that are going to help you practice this. Okay, check them out. But this is the 3-step process that you want to use to figure out whether or not a mezzanine is a story for the purposes of this course. Okay. The next ingredient in our list of 5 was streets. So how many streets does a building face? Okay. Obviously, you see that streets has a specific definition in the Ontario Building Code. It's written in an italicized font. And the definition in the Ontario Building Code, I encourage you to go and read it, but it is in general terms this, that it must be at least 9 meters in width and that it must allow access to fire department vehicle and rescue operations and that sort of stuff. Okay? That's what this is about. How many streets does a building face? So for all intents and purposes, if your building is facing streets that are less than this in width and do not allow access to rescue equipment, it's not facing any streets, okay? So I want to give you an example of what streets would look like. So if I could, I'm just going to bring this up like this. Okay, so do you know where we are? Can you tell where we are? So this is near Algonquin College, okay? And this is the ACE building, or the CA building for short. And it's right at the big intersection here. So I can see one street right here going north-south. There's another street right here going east-west. Now, look at this bridge. You see this bridge right here? Well, does it make sense that that bridge also needs to be high enough above the street level to allow for rescue equipment to get there, like a fire truck or ambulances, that kind of stuff, right? Now, as long as these streets are more than 9 meters in width and firefighting equipment and rescue equipment can get through, they're considered a street. So if this were all that we had to go by, we would say that this building is facing 2 streets. As it turns out, it's facing more streets because if we move further north here at this end, so we're now looking south back at that building, you can see how there is another street right here, okay? And that allows access from another location. So this building faces at least 3 streets for the purposes of the definition of streets, according to the Ontario Building Code. I hope that makes sense. Okay. And in your course notes, I've also included some information related to buildings that are not facing straight on a street. So if you can see here, there is a building there that's not perpendicular or parallel to a building. Sorry, let me try to say that again. What I'm trying to show here is a building where the faces of that building are not directly parallel, so facing onto a street. So this building here is kind of turned a little bit, so more than one face of that building is kind of facing that street. I'm going to put down here the article that relates to this, but in order to figure out if this building faces 1 or 2 streets or 3 or whatever, you actually have to figure out what portion of the perimeter of that building is facing that street and the distance of that portion of the perimeter. Again, here's the article relevant to that. It's also explained more in your course notes. And there is also this example here for a building that faces a curved street. So this building right here is facing one street, right? You can see it, but does that make it so that maybe it's facing more than one street? Can you see how the front of that building is obviously facing that street, but because the street is curved, it seems like maybe there would be access to the sides of the building too from that one street. So I'm going to put down here the relevant article for this example, but it's explained a bit more in your course notes, so check it out. Okay? And I think the last ingredient then that I want to discuss with you is this one here. Ingredient number 5 in topic 5, whether or not the building is sprinklered. And what I mean by that is whether or not there is equipment in the ceiling of that building that automatically releases water in the event of a fire. That's what I'm trying to get at. This is probably the easiest one of the ingredients to figure out, because either there are sprinklers or there are no sprinklers. And the nice thing about sprinklers is they're never, well, I'm going to say almost never hidden that I can tell. Okay? So either the building has sprinklers or it doesn't. Hey, I know what that is. It's the end of our get-together, right? So I want to thank you so much for your time. Now that we've covered this topic, you can do question 2 and homework 2 and move on with that. I also want to thank you so much for your time, because we're going to be getting ready to move on to topic 7. In that topic, we're going to talk a bit more about how fire affects the Ontario Building Code when it comes to combustibility or non-combustibility or fire resistance ratings and the like. So fire. Okay, bye.